So welcome back. I'm Paul Smyers. I'm discussing my observations and intuitions and beliefs, you might say, about the 2012 situation. And I've been trying to focus on a lot of really practical things that we know from astrology and ancient history, astronomy, I beg your pardon, and from ancient texts that we have, and just basically use some common sense because I don't want to be an alarmist. I like being very practical, and if there's something I need to know, I want to look into it a little bit and think about it. And what I'd come up with was a timeline that I've been going through in the earlier segments, going back from about 70,000 BC, when a massive explosion happened in an area called Toba, or Mount Toba, in basically the Malaysian area, Philippines, Indonesia, all in that area. Now, Krakatoa is another volcano in that region toward the western region, but that's much smaller. Now, this one blew ash way into China on such a huge, massive scale, and basically, in the years that followed, in the centuries that followed, the Earth went into an ice age, a very serious ice age that oscillated back and forth for a lot of thousands of years, and finally ended. Well, you could say, 11,000, 12,000, 13,000 years ago, the ice age was pretty much over. Now, there's been a lot of things happen because the glaciers and all the ice the ice age just doesn't end, punctually. There's a whole lot of things that happen. Imagine these huge layers of ice on the Earth, some of them miles thick. I mean, it's hard for us to even comprehend, but they look at this and they say, yes, they had to be there. I mean, the evidence is there. So they were massive, and it took a very, very long time for them to melt. And because they had a lot of the Earth's water locked up in there, the seas were much, much lower, hundreds of feet lower. So you can imagine that if you look at a map now of the world, and I have one behind me, another one on my left here. If you look at Google Map and you look all around the world and you see, there's a shelf out there, a big long shelf, and many areas of the world. Now, you figure that, yes, we know from observation that the seas have been rising for something like 14,000, 15,000 years. And they were in stages where they rose faster and slower. But there were times when the sea level rose in the course of centuries just huge. I mean, it was very, very dangerous. And navigators around the world, their whole patterns were changing. And any civilization that had been once upon the shores several hundred feet down, 400 or 500 feet down in the water, in the ocean, obviously they're gone, and nobody will ever find them again. And that's what can happen. Now, people argue whether there was a big civilization back there or not, but we know one thing, that whatever there was, and I'm sure there was somebody there, and they were, fishing or whatever they were doing. They may have been very sophisticated. Who knows how long they had been there. If the oceans were much, much slower, and even though the Earth was at a time in a mode where there were ice ages above a certain latitude, in the middle there was apparently, and quite obviously, in some areas of the world, it was very, very tropical, very misty, so you had this contrast of being above a certain latitude that was dangerous and icy and cold, and there were people who lived there, but they lived incredibly differently than the ones that lived in the tropical area, and they probably didn't even know each other. So what I'm really getting at is that there's a lot of evidence that the Earth has gone through some massive, massive changes, and within let's say 70,000 years, of geological, scientific evidence from the oceans and all the trees and all the different evidence that we have, there's been numerous times when the sea was rising. It rose it rose hundreds and hundreds of feet. I mean, the climate on Earth completely changed. Talk about climate change. We're getting a few extra degrees. It's getting hotter. I mean, the climate change that happened, we have records of it. We know that it happened geologically, was of such a massive scale that anything like our civilization that had to go through something like, I mean, it would not survive. It just wouldn't. It would be, the systems would all collapse. Now, the reason I'm going through all this thing is to get some historical, geological, astronomical discussion about where we are now and why we just maybe happen to be living in a time when some of these astronomical situations are happening. Now, the evidence that we have, we use the stories that we've been given. We have to apply some intuition, keep looking at those stories again, keep looking at the science again, try to keep an open mind, because if our mind is closed, we're not going to see really what's going on. Now, part of the discussion that we're going to get into is that in this 70,000 years, let's say, let's take a reasonable amount of time, 70,000 years, you look at what human beings have done, cave art, amazing cave art. I mean, these people, whoever made them, I mean, they weren't stupid, obviously. They were really great people. They had vision. They may have been living very primitively. Now, you can try to imagine, even today, there are very, very advanced, intelligent people who are living a very, very simple monastic life deliberately. Now, I'm not saying that that's what they were doing, but I'm saying that just because somebody lives in a very simple way and lives in a cave or paints with their fingers, or doesn't necessarily mean that their brain, their education, or their wisdom is cave-like. So we have to keep an open mind. And also to understand that, if we in our modern world can very easily change and work with our devices to heal, to change life, to adjust, other beings' life, we do things with plants and animals, then why is it impossible to think that, we don't consider ourselves evil doing that, manipulating people, doing genetic testing. So why would it be so horrible and ungodly if we got our bodies through a series of help from other wonderful beings in the great system that we live in? Now, this is a very radical conversation, but I'm going to look into some of that. That's been very amazing to look into, by the way. But again, the YouTube moment.